Okay, perfect. So here we are. Palliative is for the people of any age. So it's at any stage of their illness, whether that illness is curable, it's chronic, or life-threatening. But when we talk about hospice, hospice is about giving services or a medical care to the patients in the last 6 months of their life. So, and whenever a patient is under hospice, it is under the Medicare. It's 100% coverage from Medicare, and he gets the Medicare benefits. So it is specific to the Medicare hospice benefit. A patient is eligible if two physicians, one could be the primary care physician, one could be the hospice medical director, they determine that patient has 6 months or less to live if the terminal illness runs its normal course. And when you put a patient on hospice, you have to regularly evaluate, like on a few monthly basis, to make sure the patient still eligible and the patient still meets the criteria. Okay, so as we addressed, in the palliative in hospice, we are focusing on quality of life. We are focusing on the physical and psychosocial symptoms with a multidisciplinary approach. But the difference is palliative is at any stage of illness, mostly the advanced stages of terminally diagnosed illnesses, but hospice is only when you know for sure, with the specific criteria that I will go over in my next slides, that this patient has prognosis or life survival less than 6 months. All the curative treatment options are the part of palliative care, but in hospice, there are no curative treatments. Only the treatments would be provided under the umbrella of hospice will be the comfort of care and only the symptom treatments. For the palliative care, it together with appropriate life-sustaining treatment, including intensive care therapy, it can be given. And even for the cardiopulmonary resuscitation or life support, there is no limitation. Patient can be still full court, patient can get all the resuscitative measures. With the ICU team, palliative management can go side by side. But for the hospice, it's always encouraged the patient to get only the do not resuscitative orders, or also then there is no curative treatment that you will go for. It would be only symptom management when you know it's less than 6 months of their duration. This is a very important model in our world. If you look at the previous one, which is an old model, and it was in practice in a number of hospitals all over the United States for a long time. So if you look at these, previously it used to be the life prolonging care only, and when the patients were in the terminal stages of their illness, the Medicare or hospice benefit starts. But now the new model, which is under practice by American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and from family physicians too, it said that as soon as the patients are diagnosed with any terminal illness, with the life prolonging care, the palliative management starts, palliative care starts. And even after the hospice care, there is an important component that we never think of, is the bereavement process. So if the patient is under the umbrella of hospice care and the patient dies, even the process of before and after, the hospice companies, the hospice care umbrella, they helps the family and caregivers for the bereavement process as well. So this is a new model and it's in practice now. So let's talk about very specific guidelines so that we all know when the patient becomes hospice eligible. Time identification of hospice eligible patients is very important so that the patients and their families, they benefit from the more compassionate end of life care. For a patient to be eligible, we usually take two criteria. One is known as a palliative performance scale. I will show you in my next slide. And another is the KPS scale. Both are almost the same. So what the criteria is, the cutoff is always 30 to 40%. To be very accurate, we say that 30 or less than 30% PPS scale criteria patient qualifies for hospice. But sometimes even if the patient is around 40%, that means If the patient has certain vital organs comorbidities, even in that situation, sometimes patient can be hospice eligible, but you have to look like as a whole general condition of the patient, including the multi-organ involvement. If the patient has alteration in nutritional status and lost more than 10% of body weight in the last 4 to 6 months, and if the patient has an observable and documented deterioration in overall clinical condition in the past 4 to 6 months, as manifested by at least one of the following: more than 3 hospitalizations or ED visits, decrease in tolerance to physical activity, or decrease in cognitive ability, or any other comorbid conditions. So if you are seeing a patient in your practice who is having recurrent hospital admissions, recurrent ED visits, old age, advanced illness, gross functional decline in terms of physical activity and cognitive ability, that's the time you should start considering to look for the patient performance scales and to look for if the patient qualifies for hospice. So this is the PPS scale I was mentioning. If you start, there are 5 main things that we look at: the ambulation, activity, and the evidence of disease, the self-care, intake, and conscious level. That means how much the patient is ambulatory, what's the extent of disease, how much he can do his self-care, what is his intake, what is his conscious level. 100% means everything looks okay. But 40% means now the patient is bed bound, patient activity has drastically decreased, he's unable to do any work, he needs mainly assistance for the self-care, intake has been reduced a lot, or the patient is drowsy or confused. And when the patient becomes totally bed bound, that's the stage which is exact 30%. And always when a total bed bound patient and dependent patient qualifies for hospice, this is like 30% that I was talking about. So let's talk about some specific diseases. The most specific diagnosis that we see: Alzheimer, one of the top most. Alzheimer and some other progressive dementia, these are life altering and eventually fatal conditions for which curative therapy is not available. And these are progressive decline conditions. For Alzheimer, you have to be very careful when you are clinically assessing a patient if that patient would need a hospice care or not. Why? Because it's a slow progressive decline. A patient of Alzheimer can live for many years. And if you say, you cannot say every Alzheimer patient become a hospice candidate, because hospice gonna cover only 6 months and Medicare expenses will run out if you put the patient early. So what is the things that you have to look at? If the patient unable to ambulate without assistance completely, unable to dress, unable to bathe properly, and when it's bowel and bladder incontinent, and unable to speak or communicate meaningfully. There is a FAST criteria which we use for Alzheimer. You must all have heard about it. So for the FAST scoring, when the patient is 7 or 7A, that means now patient is bowel bladder incontinent and patient cannot speak more than a couple of words, and then it's the cutoff for hospice eligibility. So what are the sometimes with advanced dementia, even when the FAST score is 6D or 6E, but there is concurrent associated illness affecting any other major organ of the patient, like aspiration pneumonia, pyelonephritis, upper UTI, septicemia, decubitus ulcers, or impaired nutritional status, difficulty in swallowing, refusal to eat, or if the patient is already on NG tube or G2 feeding or TPN. These are some other things to consider along with the FAST scoring for Alzheimer patients. The assessment for protein calorie malnutrition, look for how much the patient has lost weight. Let's say weight loss over 11%, BMI less than 18, albumin less than 3.1. These are the cutoff for looking at the malnourishment. Sorry. Sorry. So some other comorbid conditions involving the major organs: congestive heart disease, COPD or restrictive lung disease, cerebrovascular disease, diabetes, renal insufficiency, or malignancy. Now we come towards another important end-stage congestive heart failure. So these are the major organs that we talk about: congestive heart failure, end-stage kidney disease, end-stage Alzheimer. So you need to be very clear about the cutoffs and the criteria. For the New York, we all talk about New York Heart Association, stage 3 and stage 4. When the patient has comfortable only at rest, patient is having symptoms even with the less than the normal activity, having fatigue, palpitations, angina, or dyspnea with exercise, or NYHA4 classification, when the patient has dyspnea or symptoms at rest or even with minimal exertion, inability to carry out physical activity without dyspnea, or if physical activity is undertaken, dyspnea or other symptoms worsen. Being optimally treated for congestive heart failure with diuretics and vasodilators like ACE inhibitors, and they are maximally medically managed and have no available surgical options. Like, you have given all the medical treatments you had for congestive heart failure, but that's the maximum medical treatment, and the patient is still either not eligible for surgery or it's at already an end state, then consider hospice. For HIV patients, the challenge about HIV patient is that they have multiple organ involvement. So there are 3-4 specific points or factors you have to consider. Look at the CD4 counts. Less than 25 per mm cube, or a persistent viral load more than 1 lakh copies per ml, plus any one of the following, because these are prone at less than 25. We are talking about more comorbid infections. We are talking about more opportunistic infections. So look, if the patient has associated CNS lymphoma, or untreated, unresponsive to treatment, having a weight loss of 33% lean body mass, MAC bacteremia, which is unresponsive to treatment, PML, or systemic lymphoma with advanced HIV, visceral Kaposi sarcoma, renal failure in absence of dialysis, cryptosporidium infection, toxo unresponsive to therapy, or CMV. So we know all these opportunistic infections we have to look for. Then you can do the PPS scaling or KPS scaling. KPS is the same as PPS that I mentioned. So when it is less than KPS 50 and the PPS 30% is almost the same, that patients are bedbound in bowel, bladder incontinent. Documentation of the following factors will support eligibility for hospice care. When you have a patient persistently symptomatic, persistent diarrhea for at least 1 year, persistent albumin level less than 2.5, concomitant active substance abuse, age more than 50 years, absence of any antiretroviral or chemo drugs related to HIV, or advanced HIV dementia complex, toxoplasmosis, or congestive heart failure, even symptomatic at rest. So that means a whole spectrum of main HIV infection, looking at the CD4 count and looking at if there is any other opportunistic infections or you have any other organ involvement. Let's talk about advanced liver disease. Liver disease patients are appropriate for hospice if, despite adequate medical management, they suffer from persistent symptoms of hepatic failure. For example, ascites, hepatic encephalopathy, recurrent variceal bleeding, or meet any of the following guidelines: multiple hospitalization, ED visits, increased use of healthcare services. So that's why I said before, looking at the patient past medical records are very, very important, and how many times the patient was having persistent symptoms and how many times the patient was having recurrent hospitalizations or ED visits. Physician assessment, laboratory or diagnostic studies consistent with disease progression or multiple active comorbid conditions. This is a very nice graph. It's taken from the American Oncology Association. The thing is, what you have to, it gives you a good idea of, let's say, if the patient has a chronic kidney disease, what is the cutoff? Why initially, when the patient has a chronic kidney disease diagnosis and the patient has anxiety associated with that diagnosis. These are the things, addressing emotions, addressing goals of care. This should be the part of palliative care and palliative care assessment. Let's say if the patient is undergoing peritoneal dialysis now, patient is having restless leg syndrome, that symptom management together with that palliative can help you with that. When, if for example, if it's getting complicated, patient was getting stroke, or now you need to address again the goals of care conversation or end of life preparation, this is where hospice comes. And at the end, the grief support is also a part of hospice. So this is how the palliative and the hospice, they interplay. But like I said before, even from the for the chronic advanced diseases, it starts from the very beginning, early in the course of the disease trajectory. You have to start the palliative care assessments and the care, goals of care conversation. For the advanced cancer, we deal a lot with oncology all the time. Most of the patients are from with an advanced diagnosis of cancer. In oncology world, the biggest predictor of hospice eligibility is the patient functional status is determined by Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group, or ECOG scale. What is this ECOG scale is that it's a median survival of 3 months roughly correlates with score of more than 3, and ECOG score of 2 is generally supported of being eligible for hospice services. So ECOG 3, ECOG 4, this is what is the hospice criteria. Of 1, these patients are usually completely ambulatory. For at the 2, these patients are symptomatic but less than 50% in bed during the day. When they are more than 50% in bed for the day, they are not, or they are bed bound. This is the time when ECOG 3 and ECOG 4 starts, and now patient needs hospice. So this is the exact explanation when I talk about ECOG 3. These are the patient capable of only limited self-care, confined to bed or chair more than 50% of waking hours, completely disabled or cannot carry on any self-care, or totally confined to bed or chair, then is the ECOG 4. So now you will have, because I mentioned it's a long detail, but I tried to mention the most specifically advanced diseases and the most common diagnoses that we encounter, and to have a clear idea when these patients qualify for hospice. But now the very important concept of palliative care. We have a culture where a lot of people, a lot of patients, a lot of clinicians, they believe that palliative is hospice, which is not true. And this is what we have to learn, and we have to educate also. So as I have said before, there is no timing restriction for palliative care. As soon as you have at any stage of illness, as soon as you have a diagnosis, or the patient will have is having a disease whose disease trajectory will go downwards, or patient has poor prognosis, or patient has a diagnosis of a terminal illness, starting from the very beginning, addressing the patient emotional support, giving more, starting the goals of care conversation, starting the symptom management. This is under palliative care. This is for at the time of admission. The specific criteria, I took it from Up to Date. When at the time of admission, let's say you are doing an outpatient clinic at the time of admission, or in the ER, what criteria you should look for a palliative care assessment or a palliative care consultation. In the history, if patient has frequent admissions, more than one admission for same condition in several months, admission prompted by difficult to control physical or psychological symptoms, complex care requirements, decline in function, feeding intolerant, or unattended decline in the weight, which the general term that we say as failure to thrive. So failure to thrive patients, they should have a palliative assessment. Secondary criteria, sometimes old patients who are cognitively impaired, some metastatic incurable cancer, COPD patients who are on a chronic use for oxygen at home, sudden cardiac arrest outside the hospital, current or past hospice program enrollee patients, limited social support when you see that family is in stress or patient has a chronic mental illness, there is no history of completing an advanced care planning discussion or document. So sometimes just for advanced care planning discussions or documents, consider the palliative, because especially for the ICU patients, the ICU, there is a busy environment, clinicians, new residents, there are all a lot of other things to do. So even for those patients to get the DNR code, advanced care planning, we can always help you guys. So goals are, what is our goals that we more focus for? It's about palliative care. It tries to assist patients with a serious life-threatening illness in achieving the following goals: adequate control of pain and other symptoms, achieve a sense of control, relieve burden on family members, strengthen the relationships, gain a realistic understanding of nature of illness and what to expect in the future. This is a holistic approach that palliative care is, that exactly explaining what is the nature of illness, giving a holistic approach, and so the patient and the family, they have a clear understanding what is the current condition and what is expected in the near future. Then available different treatment options, different alternatives, and what is the pros and cons of that. Name decision maker in case of loss of decisional capacity, have financial affairs in order. I mentioned these, so these are actually the domains. Physical aspects, I told you, psychological, psychiatric, sometimes the spiritual, religious aspects of care as well. And you know, we are a multicultural nation. There are different cultures and they have different beliefs, and especially when we talk about the end of life care and the care of imminently dying patients. So this is what domains which are addressed by palliative care. And then there is an ethical and legal component too, especially when the patient has uh, they are not the proxy by themselves and they have assigned a surrogate or a decision maker. So what are the other ethical components related to that, especially the patient autonomy? These are the specific domains of palliative. When I talk about symptoms management, multiple studies have shown that across a range of serious illness, cancer, dementia, end-stage kidney disease, cardiopulmonary failure, palliative care services improve patient symptoms and quality of care at the end of life. The primary role of palliative care is the relief of pain and other physical, psychological, and emotional symptoms. Establish the goal of care and give the psychosocial support, and also help in the bereavement process. And we always work as like a multidisciplinary team. So the main focus of palliative is also a coordination of care. In our team, there are social workers, there is chaplain, and then as needed, we can involve psychiatrists or psychologists and the bereavement counselors as well. So this was a study that was done in different, it is published in New England Journal of Medicine, regarding what were the symptoms with these most common diseases like cancer, congestive heart failure, COPD, chronic kidney disease, dementia, or AIDS, the most common symptoms that were addressed by palliative care physicians. So for sure, on the top most is pain. For pain, we even if the patients need morphine, if patient like all the opioids, they are under coverage of palliative care umbrella. Other symptoms, with the cancer, mostly it's the pain is the highest one, between 80 to 90%. In congestive heart failure, you see is breathlessness, fatigue. So it's kind of a list with for a good, really good comparison, like pain, breathlessness, fatigue, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, constipation, anxiety, depression, dry mouth, sleep disturbances. So all these symptoms are managed by a palliative care. Let me give you a real case example to see how the involving palliative early in the course of the disease can help the family to make their final decision, or sometimes they change their final decision as well. So 80 years female, Caucasian, divorced, living alone, presented in the ED unresponsive to verbal commands, not in any acute distress, retired teacher by occupation. The past menstrual significant history was chronic AFib, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. So CT scan showed an acute appearing infarct with a large cerebral infarction, which is due to the middle meningeal artery. So in a simple case, old female and presented with an infarction and stroke. Admitted on the telemetry, on X-ray showed large pleural effusion bilaterally. NG was started and palliative team was consulted as a trigger consult tool. About the trigger consult, it has been established in a lot of hospitals in US. When the patients have the advanced disease or the patient have a terminal diagnosis, immediately like a trigger consult, palliative is consulted, but we are also establishing it in Larkin. So when the palliative was consulted, the second day, the first discussion was done about code status and advanced care planning. The family agreed and they changed the code from full code to DNR, DNR. So this was the first step that palliative helped the medical team. Then the third day, patient blood pressure rise, she had copious secretions, having hypoxia, family was at bedside, the poor prognosis was explained and documented, and patient was shifted to the CCU. The healthcare proxy for this patient was the daughter. On the day fifth, as soon as the patient got a little better and opened up the eyes, family refused palliative because that's again the same thing that I talked, like patient, a lot of people and patients think that it's hospice, so they decline the palliative consult. That is okay. So on the sixth day, just the palliative had the meeting with the family only for explaining and updating about the patient condition, having just the goals of care conversation and talking about the different treatments what patient was getting and what is the expected future. That's okay. So that was a second step that we just updated the family. On day 7, patient deteriorated again. And then it was a new event of atrial fibrillation on ECG. Now, on day 8, there was another meeting of palliative team with the family regarding advanced care planning, including the coordinated care plan. And now they introduced the concept of hospice and comfort of care. Family agreed. Family requested DNR and hospice. But then the primary care physician the next day attending reports that patient's condition is better. And we know that it's when the patient is in this situation, sometimes the days there gets better or sometimes they are deteriorated, which is totally fine. So the family declined hospice, that's okay. Now, when the patient had another complication, aspiration pneumonia developed, now the daughter consulted the palliative team and the consulted hospice. PEG tube was put on hold due to AFib. After hospice evaluation, PEG tube insertion was canceled. Patient was full DNR with comfort of care and symptom treatment only. Attending physician agreed with the hospice plan and patient was shifted to the skilled nursing care facility. This is how the early consultation, they eventually help and change the family perceptive and also worked as a coordinated team with the attending care physician to finally, and just imagine if it was not involved, that then the patient would have stayed so longer time in the hospital and eventually may have just crashed on the hospital bed. I will really put a focus on what is exactly the economic benefit of hospice and palliative also in our healthcare system in just a quick short slide. So when we see our patients in ICU, there is a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges we are facing as a new field, especially in this area. Multiple studies confirm that symptom distress is still prevalent at high levels of severely critically ill patients. Communication between clinicians and families is often delayed and it's fragmented. Why? Because we know that ICU physicians, they are sometimes they miss opportunities to talk more in detail with the families because of the workload and all that. So when families, they meet with ICU physicians, they frequently have either insufficient time to share their perspective on patient goals or values or express their own concerns. Some patients, they spend their last days in ICU because planning for care in a more suitable or preferred setting is inadequate. In addition, transition from one setting to another are increasingly frequent, but often without adequate support for patient and family. So sometimes this transition of care is also very, very challenging, with which the palliative can really help you guys. Now, I will talk about a little, just a quick research. It's a huge data of 5 years, which analyze what is the effect of impact of hospice care on survival and healthcare costs for patients diagnosed with lung cancer. The purpose of this study was to evaluate the effect of hospice care on survival and healthcare costs for lung cancer patients in their final month of life. This database analyzed about 3,399 adult lung cancer patients. They died between 2014 to 2018. A logistic regression analysis were performed to determine the predictors of high healthcare costs, like cost falling above the 90th percentile. So patient who received the hospice care was assigned as age group, and the patient who do not receive the hospice care, they were non-hospice group. So the results were very alarming. The patients in age group, they had a longer median survival than as compared to non-hospice patients, significant p-value, but the non-age group, they had a lower mean healthcare cost. So what was the difference? The survival of hospice group was longer than non-hospice, and patients in non-hospice were 3.7 times more likely to have a higher healthcare cost at the end of life. So just imagine 3.7 times per patient. The patients without hospice, they utilize most healthcare costs, but even the patients with hospice, they had a longer survival as compared to the ones who were not on hospice, and the huge difference of 3.7 times in terms of the healthcare cost. Why? Because when the patients who were not adopted hospice care, they received more intensive treatments, chemotherapy, they stayed longer for on mechanical ventilation and intubation. So the very important concept that palliative work on is the coordination of care. And most of the programs, seriously ill patients and the families, they face the challenges in navigating about and understanding that there are different care plans in this healthcare system, because the negotiation between multiple specialties, diagnosis, and treatments is sometimes a big challenge. So palliative care programs, because of their interdisciplinary approach, they assist patients and families in understanding and regaining the control of over their care plans, and in receiving further care in the setting most appropriate to their needs and resources. And appropriate settings may include home care, nursing home, hospice care facilities, and also inpatient settings. This is another study which is giving a little idea about the economic benefit. It was done it was a meta-analysis. The economic benefit of palliative care consultation for hospitalized adults with serious illness were studied in a meta-analysis. There was a huge patient number, a total of 133,000 almost patients with different significant advanced diseases of cancer, heart, liver, kidney failure, and COPD. Regardless, whatever their diagnosis was, they said that the palliative consultation was associated with significant reduction in hospital cost. And if you look at the confidence interval, it's almost 3,000, some $237 per person. You are saving the hospital cost revenue for the early palliative care consultation. And when you talk about effect on survival, there was a landmark study actually, which patients with newly diagnosed metastatic non-small cell lung cancer who were randomly assigned to early palliative care integrated with standard oncology care had a better quality of life, fewer depressive symptoms, and a longer mean survival as compared to those who were assigned to only oncology care alone. So there is another new concept which is booming in our palliative world, is like in doing an integrated palliative and oncology clinics. So we are working on that. But if you look at the effect on the mean survival, it was 11.6 versus 8.9 as when doing the oncology care alone. So these are some of the references that I use, and I thank you again all for joining this presentation. My main focus was to give you like a better understanding of what is actually the difference in the palliative and hospices, and what is the specific criteria as you look for, and the symptom management that we can deal with the palliative care consultation alone. If you have any questions, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Any questions over Zoom? Any questions in person? No, thank you so much, Dr. Khan. If we have any follow-up questions, we'll be sure to reach out to you.
Thank you so much all for joining.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.